My name is Emily Carter. I am 23 years old and was born and raised in a quiet suburban town outside of Chicago. On the outside, my family looked picture perfect. A 2-story house with a neat lawn, smiling neighbors, and Sunday church visits. But behind those closed doors, my life was anything but perfect. I wasn't treated as a daughter. I was treated like a maid. Cooking, cleaning, scrubbing floors, while my parents proudly flaunted my siblings, ignoring me like I didn't even belong. What they didn't know was that while I folded their laundry and wiped their wine glasses, I was also building something of my own. A small business, an idea that would one day rewrite every rule in our family. But at that time, all I felt was pain, betrayal, and the constant weight of being invisible. And then came the day that changed everything, the night my parents threw an extravagant dinner to impress a powerful CEO. They dressed me up like their servant, ordering me around in front of their wealthy guests. But when the CEO's eyes met mine, he didn't see a servant. He saw something they never imagined. He looked at me and said one word that shattered the illusion of their control: boss. That was the night the roles reversed. The night I stopped being their maid and became their reckoning. Before we dive into this story of betrayal, revenge and justice, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to never miss another shocking tale. Because the question you'll ask yourself tonight is this: when the ones who should love you the most betray you the worst, how far would you go to make them pay? To truly understand my story, you need to know the people who shaped my world, the very ones who claimed to love me, but treated me as though I was less than nothing. My father, Richard Carter, 51, was a proud man. A mid-level manager at a finance firm in downtown Chicago, he carried himself like he owned the city. His greatest joy was projecting wealth he didn't actually have: expensive suits bought on credit, cars leased to impress his colleagues, and long evenings at business mixers where he could boast about his perfect family. He cared more about appearances than the truth that simmered beneath our roof. Then there was my mother, Margaret Carter, 48, a socialite who never quite made it to the circles she dreamed of. She spent her days organizing charity luncheons, scrolling through glossy magazines, and planning dinner parties designed to climb the invisible social ladder. To her, children weren't a source of love. They were trophies. My older brother, Daniel, 25, had the charm and athletic build she adored. A star in college football, he turned into a fitness trainer, and he was paraded around as the family's pride. My younger sister, Chloe, 19, with her golden hair and perfect grades, was the darling, the princess who could do no wrong. And then there was me, Emily, the forgotten middle child. I once shoved into chores while my siblings enjoyed adoration. To my parents, I wasn't a daughter, I was a worker. Their maid is in plain sight. Our house was grand on the outside, a spacious suburban property with polished floors, chandeliers, and family portraits staged for perfection. But to me, it felt like a prison. Every time guests came over, I was expected to serve, clean, and then disappear into the background. My mother's sharp eyes would cut me down if a glass wasn't spotless, while my father's voice would bark if dinner wasn't served on time. My siblings sneered, mocking me as if I were beneath them, and still, I endured it. Because deep inside, I carried a secret they never saw coming. While they dismissed me, I was building a business from the shadows, learning, planning, and saving every penny I could. The weight of their cruelty fueled me, but so did the hunger for justice. Everything in my family revolved around reputation, who we knew, what parties we were invited to, and how people perceived us. So when my father announced that a powerful CEO, Alexander Hale, would be joining us for dinner, the entire household went into overdrive. Alexander Hale wasn't just any businessman. He was the head of a multi-million-dollar tech empire in Chicago. He was the kind of man my parents dreamed of impressing, believing he could open doors to wealth and connections. But what they didn't know was this: the man they were desperate to flatter was the same man who had already crossed paths with me. In a way that would shake the ground beneath them, that dinner, that single night, would not just be another party. It would become the stage where everything unraveled: the lies, the cruelty, the facade of family perfection. So before we step into that moment of reckoning, take a second to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to this channel. Because what happens next isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a reminder that the people you underestimate can be the very ones who hold your fate in their hands. And as you'll soon see, the maid they ignored would rise as the one person they could never control. The weeks leading up to that dinner became a test of endurance I will never forget. My parents pushed me harder than ever, determined to polish the house into a palace worthy of impressing Alexander Hale. I scrubbed every tile until my hands bled, ironed tablecloths until my arms ached, and polished silverware that wasn't even ours. It had been borrowed from a neighbor just to create the illusion of wealth. While my siblings lounged in the living room, watching movies and laughing, I carried trays, folded laundry, and ran errands. Every time I slowed down, my mother's voice pierced the air like a knife. "Emily, don't you dare embarrass us. You're lucky we even let you live here." Those words stayed with me, not just because of their cruelty, but because she meant them. To her, I wasn't family. I was a burden disguised as a servant. But even in those moments of humiliation, I kept my secret close. Late at night, when the house finally quieted, I locked myself in my tiny room with nothing but a secondhand laptop. That's where I built my online business, small freelance projects that grew into a steady stream of income. My parents thought I was too weak to stand on my own, but with every contract signed and every dollar saved, I was building the foundation of something they couldn't control. Still, living under their roof came with daily cruelty. My brother Daniel mocked me relentlessly, calling me Cinderella without the prince. My sister Chloe treated me like her personal assistant, tossing her clothes at me with the demand that I wash and press them before her next date. And my father? He barely spoke to me, unless he needed someone to clear his plate. There were moments when the injustice nearly broke me. Once, after scrubbing the kitchen all day, my mother walked in with her friends and announced loudly, "Don't mind Emily, she's just the help." They laughed. I smiled through tears, swallowing my anger like poison. But here's the truth about poison. It doesn't just kill, it transforms. And with every insult, every slap of humiliation, I grew sharper, colder, and more determined. The night before the dinner, as I set the table under my mother's watchful eye, she whispered, "If you ruin this, Emily, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Her words were meant to scare me. But instead, they sparked something I hadn't felt in years: power. Because I knew something she didn't. Alexander Hale wasn't just coming as a guest. He already knew who I was. That secret burned inside me like a live wire. My parents were preparing to show me off as their maid, their proof of control, while they paraded Daniel and Chloe as golden children. But the man they wanted to impress had already seen me, not as their servant, but as the woman behind a thriving business deal he'd quietly invested in. The stage was set. The house gleamed, the wine was poured, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted lamb. My parents believed they were on the edge of greatness. What they didn't realize was that they were on the edge of collapse. And as I placed the final dish on the table, my hands steady, my heart steady, I thought to myself, "Night, everything changes. But how, you wonder? That's the part that will leave you breathless. Before I tell you, make sure to like this video, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. Because what's coming next is the kind of twist no one in that house ever saw coming." The night of the dinner arrived like a storm. The house glowed with golden lights, crystal glasses shimmered on the table, and laughter filled the air as my parents entertained their carefully chosen guests. I stood in the corner wearing a plain black dress my mother had tossed at me that afternoon. Something simple, so you don't distract anyone. To them, I was nothing but background noise. The invisible servant meant to make everything appear perfect. When the door opened and Alexander Hale walked in, my father's face lit up with desperate admiration. Alexander, tall and composed, carried himself with the calm authority of a man who had nothing to prove. My parents fawned over him, introducing Daniel and Chloe with rehearsed smiles, showering them in praise, while I refilled glasses and carried plates like the obedient maid they believed me to be. And then it happened. As I leaned forward to set a dish before him, Alexander's eyes caught mine. A small flicker of recognition passed across his face, sharp and undeniable. My father, eager to show control, chuckled nervously and said, "Don't mind Emily. She helps us around the house." The room stilled. Alexander placed his glass down, folded his hands, and looked at me, not as a servant, but as an equal. Then, in a voice calm yet cutting, he asked, "Emily Carter? You're the founder of EC Digital Solutions, aren't you?" The silence was deafening. My father's smile froze. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. Daniel and Chloe stared in confusion. And me? I stood tall, heart pounding, as Alexander continued, "Your business has been nothing short of extraordinary. I've admired your work for months. In fact, I've recently expanded my investment. And if I'm not mistaken, that makes you my partner." Partner. The words sliced through the air like lightning. My parents' faces drained of color. Every guest at that table shifted uncomfortably, whispering in shock. And then Alexander delivered the final blow. He leaned back smiling and said the words that changed everything. In this room, she's not the maid. She's the boss. For the first time in years, I didn't shrink. I didn't bow my head. I looked straight at my parents, two people who had humiliated me, crushed me, erased me, and I watched them drown in their own shame. They had spent their lives chasing approval, begging to impress a man who now bowed to me. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to fight. My revenge was silent, elegant, and undeniable. In that moment, they saw the truth. The daughter they had treated like dirt had risen higher than they ever could. The rest of the dinner unfolded in stunned silence. My mother tried to smile through gritted teeth. My father poured himself another glass of wine, his hand trembling. Daniel sat frozen, and Chloe's wide eyes flickered with something between envy and disbelief. I served no more plates that night. Instead, Alexander raised his glass to me, and every guest followed. It was the toast my parents had always wanted, but it wasn't for them. It was for me, and as I lifted my glass, my heart steady, I knew justice had been served. When the dinner ended, the guests filtered out with hushed whispers, their eyes darting back at me as if I were a story they couldn't wait to tell. My parents didn't say a word as the door closed behind Alexander Hale. The house, once so full of forced laughter and showmanship, now echoed with silence so sharp it almost rang in my ears. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one hanging my head in shame. They were. My father sat slumped in his chair, the weight of humiliation pressing down on him. My mother stared at her untouched glass of wine, her perfect mask cracked and useless. Daniel and Chloe didn't laugh anymore. They didn't mock. They didn't dare. I walked past them slowly, deliberately, my footsteps echoing on the polished floor I had scrubbed countless times. And as I passed, I realized something powerful. I no longer belonged to that house or to their cruelty. I had carved a life of my own, and they could no longer touch me. The days that followed were different. My parents, who once barked orders at me, now avoided my gaze. They didn't ask me to cook, to clean, or to serve. The silence between us was heavy, but it was a silence of defeat. They knew they had lost me, not just as their maid, but as their daughter. The bond they had broken with years of cruelty could never be repaired. As for me, I poured my energy into my company. With Alexander Hale's partnership, EC Digital Solutions grew faster than I ever imagined. I moved into my own apartment in downtown Chicago, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city skyline. A view that reminded me every morning that I had built my future with my own hands, despite everything that had been stacked against me. But success wasn't the sweetest part of my story. The sweetest part was justice. Not the kind shouted in anger or taken with violence, but the kind that unfolded quietly, undeniably, in front of those who had underestimated me. My revenge wasn't loud. It was silent. And silence sometimes is the most powerful weapon of all. Looking back now, I see more than just my own journey. I see a lesson that runs deep in the American spirit, one rooted in resilience, self-worth, and the refusal to be defined by others' cruelty. This country was built by people who were dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated. Yet they rose. They proved their worth not with words, but with action. And that's the heart of my story, too. Because here's the truth. Family is supposed to nurture, protect, and love. But sometimes family fails us. Sometimes the very people who should lift us up are the ones who push us down. And when that happens, we face a choice. Do we allow their cruelty to define us? Or do we rise beyond it and build something stronger? I chose to rise, and tonight I hope this story reminds you of your own power. That no matter who dismisses you, no matter who treats you as though you don't matter, you have a choice. You can take that pain, that rejection, and turn it into fuel. You can create a life so strong, so undeniable, that the very people who once doubted you are forced to face the truth. So let me leave you with this. What would you do if the people you trusted most turned you into their servant? Would you break under the weight of betrayal? Or would you fight quietly, patiently, until the day came when justice was yours? If this story touched you, share it. Comment your thoughts below. I want to know what you would have done in my place. And don't forget to subscribe, because more stories like this are waiting for you. Stories that remind us that in the end, no matter how deep the cruelty, no matter how heavy the injustice, justice always finds a way. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge is not in destroying those who hurt you, but in living a life they can never take away.